Before we get started, I want to thank a lot of people, not a lot, but enough, that helped us along the way. Michael Gahn, for openers, who donated the space and the time and the effort here to allow us to be together. I've known Michael for longer than I hate to tell you, maybe 60 years and or more. And he just doesn't have the word no in his vocabulary. So we owe a great deal of thanks to him. John Canizaro runs the portion of the property that deals with events like this, and he's been extraordinarily good too. So I want to thank John, if he's here somewhere, and Chris Johnson, who makes the mechanics of everything come together in a nice way. So to those three, we certainly appreciate it. Mark Fierro is here, who has Fierro Communications. He's filmed all of this. It'll all be filmed, and you'll be able to see it and tune into it in the next few days. A lot of people are not coming today because of the virus, and they've all called and told us that they would ordinarily be here, but they're going to wait to see it on the video. So you'll be able to view it, play it back, find the details and the finer points that are there as you move forward. I might add that Mark has done all of this for nothing. It's been a labor of love with him, and we appreciate it and deeply are indebted to you for that. Then I want to thank the Roguish Communications Group, my company, and the people that are here today and those that have helped us through it all along the way. They've been mechanically in play from the beginning, much to their chagrin, I'm sure, from time to time, but I deeply appreciate that. Patricia Gordon is from the Mathias in Henderson, Mathias, is it? School, and she was with us from the beginning. She helped our daughter with math. She does amazing work in the community, and I can't say enough good things about her. So if you need someone in that regard, she's the best. And I want to thank Peter Guzman, who heads the Latin Chamber. Peter has probably let his membership know more than anyone about what we're doing and how we're doing it, and we've had a lot of friends, I have, that have called out and are going to be utilizing what we're putting together here today. Also Barbara Buckley of the Legal Aid Center. Barbara is a former state senator, majority leader, extraordinarily talented and intellectually in play with everything that we're trying to do. And so we owe her a great attitude too, as much. Thank you. Catalina Cardenas is here to assist the audience with questions during the seminar. And so if we have a translation problem or a need, we'll have someone here that'll be in play to help you. So if you have a question, raise your hand and she'll bring the microphone to you. She's fluent in Spanish, and so there'll be a translation component there that will be helpful to you. And then we're asking you just to turn your phone's volume down. I know you're going to keep them on, and I understand that. And but I also want to thank the speakers, and I'll let Lori introduce them all here when they get started. But without further ado, we'll just get this underway, and I hope that you're in a place where you can benefit from it. That's the whole purpose of it. We spent probably $1 million getting here. We're going to get back about half of that, so we're not in it to make money, just so you know. There's better ways to make money than to sue a school district. Anyway, thank you so much. I appreciate it. We love having you here. Now I'm going to introduce my wife, Lori. We have discussed this a lot around the house, in case you didn't know. All right.
Thank you. Well, good morning. Thank you for joining us today. I was asked to talk a little bit about our journey and why we are here. When our daughter was 3 to 4 years old, we noticed that she was having trouble communicating. As she got older, she was not forming her letters, and she was not understanding what she was reading. Adding and subtraction was extremely difficult. After watching her struggle to learn, we had her assessed so that we could figure out what was going on. Once we had her evaluated, we finally understood why she was having such difficulties. And even better, we received recommendations as to how to remedy her learning disorders. So we contacted the Clark County School District and provided those recommendations to the district. We repeatedly asked them to include those recommendations in our daughter's IEP. The school district said no. In fact, they refused to implement the solution. We took a stand and filed a complaint against the Clark County School District, which is the 5th largest school district in the United States. We filed the complaint because we refused to let them get away with it. So we fought back and we persevered. And we stand here today to encourage you to do the same. But don't take my word for it. Let me read from Federal Judge Richard Boulware's opinion regarding our case. Here are some of the things that he said. Quote, "The record clearly indicates that during the development of both IEPs, plaintiffs were not provided information regarding any programs provided by the district that would adequately address the child's unique needs." Quote, "The district failed to provide any response to the specific needs of the child except to essentially say to the parents, 'Trust us to provide her with what she needs.' This is not sufficient." Quote, "Defendants' alleged representation about a multi-sensory program in the IEP was illusory, as the district had no such program or methodology." Quote, "Not only did they seriously infringe the parents' opportunity to participate in the IEP formulation process, but they also resulted in the loss of educational opportunity for the child." And the last one, I promise. Quote, "The record further establishes that this training and the associate methodologies would have benefited many other students, including those with dyslexia, and could have been easily disseminated throughout the district using Train the Trainer session." I hope the judge's decision is an inspiration to you. This is a pathway for you to receive what your children are entitled to as a matter of law. Thank you, and now I would like to introduce Tracy Block Zaretsk from the Dyslexia Training Institute. Dr. Salmon Hurley was not able to join us, but Tracy is her partner and she is here to present. So again, thank you for being here, and don't lose sight that today is all about you, and it is about your children. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Block Zaretsk. I'm one of the founding members of the Dyslexia Training Institute, along with my business partner, Dr. Kelly Salmon Hurley, who was supposed to be here today, but unfortunately has the dreaded virus and was not able to make it. So we didn't want you guys to not have some basic information about dyslexia, which probably many of you already do. So we scrambled, and I hopped on a plane last night and got here late last night, and here we are. So at the Dyslexia Training Institute, the reason we started the Dyslexia Training Institute is because Kelly and I met at an adult literacy program in the San Diego Public Library, and we worked with lots of adults who, some had been identified in the school system, many had not, who went through most of them going through our school system, who didn't learn to improve their basic skills enough to be able to function well as adults. And we heard their heart-wrenching stories day after day, and we were like, why is this happening? And we learned about dyslexia. We learned a lot of our adults that were coming to our program had dyslexia, or at least the characteristics of dyslexia. We know that our universities, for the most part, are failing our educators, our classroom teachers, our gen ed teachers, our reading specialists, our school psychs, our administrators, about teaching them about what dyslexia is, how to identify a student that has characteristics of dyslexia, because the school system doesn't diagnose, but they can definitely look for characteristics of dyslexia, and what to do to help them. So we're like, what can we do? Because we don't want this funnel to continue going on of kids going through our school system and ending up in these adult literacy programs that are throughout the United States. And so we started our online courses for parents, teachers, private practitioners, educators, administrators about what dyslexia is, how to identify it, and what to do to help these students through appropriate remediation and accommodations. And we started our organization in 2009 and are still going strong. Everybody thought you couldn't do this online. And then COVID hit, and now everybody believes it can be done online. And we're like, excuse us, we've been doing it since 2009. So we've served lots of parents, lots of educators. We have had lots of teachers who have paid out of their own pocket because they're so desperate, wanting to help these kids so much. I always tell parents, don't blame the teacher, blame our universities. They're the ones that have failed our educators, because there's lots of educators out there that are trying so hard to figure out how to help these kids who are struggling. So with no further ado, what I'd like to do is go through my PowerPoint about the basics of dyslexia and what to do about it. Please do, if you have questions, don't hesitate to raise your hand. I'll be happy to answer questions either during the presentation or at the end, okay? So when you hear the word dyslexia, I just want you to take a moment and think about what you think about when you hear the word dyslexia. Now, this group is probably a little more unique than the general public because a lot of you probably have some background knowledge maybe at this point about dyslexia, or have a child or a student in your classroom that has dyslexia or characteristics of it and might define it a little bit differently. But what a lot of people will think is that well, I'm going to come back to that slide, is that it's seeing letters or words backwards. And we're going to talk about that. There are so many misconceptions about dyslexia out there. But because they don't train our educators very well about it, there's so many kids that are struggling day in and day out. They go to school 5 days a week for months at a time and are trying so hard and aren't getting anywhere, and they feel defeated and frustrated because they know they're intellectually capable and they can't figure out why they can't do what everybody else seems to do so easily. They feel isolated. And when we interviewed, Kelly ended up interviewing over 50 adults to write her book, which is The Adult Side of Dyslexia. And the one word many of them almost all used was the word, it felt like torture. It felt like torture going there every day and struggling through that system because nobody understood that I was trying really hard. And it felt like torture as an adult because they can't access basic skill, things that most adults do. I know an adult who needed medical help, and the doctor told him, go out the hall, go down the hall, look for this sign, look for that sign, and go, that's where you need to go. And because he couldn't read the signs, he just left. And yet he needed that medical help. And that's what happens to these adults. They have kids that they can't help with their homework. That's torture to them. They feel terrible. And so we really have to really stop this flow of kids that are going through our school system and ending up not with the basic skills they need to function in our society. In the United States of America, we need basic literacy skills because we're a very print-rich environment. And it's not just reading, it's also writing. So before we go forth, because in our school systems and sometimes with other people, they'll say dyslexia is just, an umbrella term, or that doesn't really exist, or it's just a general label, and it's not. And I can't tell you to believe that dyslexia is real, but I'm going to guess since all of you are here, you're going to believe it is. But I'm going to base my presentation on the fact that dyslexia is real and provide you information to support that. So some of the common misconceptions about dyslexia is that it's seeing letters or words backwards. We're going to talk about that more in just a moment. These are actual quotes we've heard. We didn't make any of these up. She is in the 3rd grade. She's already outgrown her dyslexia. You have dyslexia your whole life. You're born with it. You have it your whole life. It can be remediated, but you will have dyslexia your whole life. It doesn't go away. It's caused by a bump on the head. It is not. It is something that you're born with. If you get a bump on the head and end up having difficulties learning to read and write, that's called a brain injury. That's something completely different. Dyslexia isn't real. We hear that so often. That's why that last picture you saw, that little boy, he was wearing our company shirt. And so we actually are like, we're going to make a shirt that says dyslexia is real and wear it everywhere. Kelly and I now selectively only wear it when we're ready to talk about dyslexia, because you can't wear that in public and people not come up and talk to you, because wherever you go, somebody either has it or knows somebody that has it, and they'll come up and start talking to you. It's an umbrella term. It's not. It's a very specific disability. And we've heard this one in school systems often, that not only do they not work with kids with dyslexia, they're not required to, which leads us to the last one, that dyslexia isn't part of special education law, which it very clearly is. It's specifically stated in IDEA law under the definition of specific learning disabilities as one of the qualifying conditions. So the word dyslexia is actually in the law as a qualifying condition. Unfortunately, a lot of our school systems don't know this. So let's look at the word dyslexia. What does it actually mean? The DYS part means lack of ability. The LEX part means with words. And the IA is just a noun forming suffix. So it is, at its simplest definition, a lack of ability with words and language. Let's first talk about, I think this is one of the most important slides because there are so many misconceptions out there about what it's not. It's not caused by poor eyesight or hearing problems. There are people out there who believe if you just put certain color overlays or certain color lenses that it's going to cure dyslexia. I tell you, Kelly and I wish it was that easy. Because my brother once asked me, what's your guys' long-term business plan? I said, to go out of business. And he said, that's a terrible business plan. I said, we want to go out of business because we're no longer needed. We should not exist. We shouldn't exist. Our school systems should be addressing our kids' needs. But they want to look for Band-Aids for something that isn't a Band-Aid issue. And so they want to do vision therapy and cover overlays. Those are not going to address dyslexia. If they have a vision processing problem, maybe that will help that, but it's not going to help somebody with their actual dyslexia. Now, sometimes people with dyslexia will end up with poor tracking abilities, and that's because when we're reading, our eyes are doing this movement of going across the page. And it's one of the few activities that requires this type of tracking where we go across a page and then have to go to the next line and go back and forth. It's one of the few activities that we do in our life that requires that kind of eye movement. And that comes from lots of training, which comes from lots of reading. And if you don't read a lot, then it can cause these kind of tracking issues. So if they have a tracking issue, it isn't what's causing the dyslexia, it's the result of the dyslexia, because they haven't had enough training of that brain to their eye muscles to do that kind of tracking. Can vision therapy help that? Probably, but it's not going to cure the dyslexia, it's just going to help with the tracking problem. It's not a developmental, it's not seeing letters or words backwards. That's the most common misconception out there. And it comes from the idea of that they have letter confusion, which we're going to talk about in just a moment as well. But they see people with dyslexia see print just like people without dyslexia. They don't see letters and words upside down, backwards, or inside out. They see it just like you and I see it that don't have dyslexia. It's not a developmental disability, meaning it doesn't affect IQ. To actually be diagnosed with dyslexia, currently you have to have average to above average IQ. There are studies going on with people below average IQ and seeing the brain studies that they're showing they can have some similar patterns when they're trying to read if they have difficulties learning to read. It's not acquired alexia, aphasia, or anomia. Those are that bump on the head. Those are brain injuries. Dyslexia is not a brain injury. It's a neurological wiring in the brain that's different. And so we call it a disability because that's what you have to call something to get services, but really it's just a learning difference because the brain is wired differently. And we can help wire the brain in a better way with appropriate remediation, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it isn't something that has caused any type of brain injury in the brain that's caused the inability to read. It's not a degenerative disease, meaning it doesn't get worse with age. A lot of people think it does get worse with age. What's really happening is the demands on reading and writing are increasing, so the manifestation of it looks more profound as the demands get bigger. It's not a lack of educational opportunity, meaning to be diagnosed with dyslexia, they've had to been in environments that others have learned in or could have learned in that don't have a print-based disability. It's not the result of lack of effort on the student. I can't tell you how many report cards I have seen or parents reporting that on the report card it says, if they just tried harder, if they just focused more, if they just applied themselves. These kids are working as hard, if not harder, than their peers because they so desperately, especially in the younger grades, kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth grade, they so desperately want to please their teacher and their parents and be like their peers. Maybe by, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth grade and beyond, they're getting beyond frustrated and they're shutting down. But it's not because they don't care, it's because they've been trying for years and it's not working and they're frustrated beyond belief. So when we see that, it's like, do you think that they enjoy this? Do you think that they don't want to try? So it's not a lack of effort on their part. It's also not a medical condition, so you can't just go to a regular doctor and get a diagnosis. You have to go to a neuropsychologist or clinical psychologist, somebody trained that has the appropriate training to be able to do a diagnostic testing and give a diagnostic impression. So it's not a regular medical doctor. In fact, a lot of pediatricians aren't even really aware of what dyslexia is. So they'll usually refer you back to what happens is the parent goes, the school tells the parent to go to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician goes, well, you have to go back to school, that's their thing. And they get in this horrible circle that gets them nowhere. Okay, so let's talk about that letter reversal. When we are born and until we start learning about printed language, an object is an object no matter which way it is facing. Doesn't matter if it's up, down, left, right, facing towards you, facing away from you, that's going to be an elephant no matter which way we put it. But all of a sudden we come to print, and certain symbols like a line with a circle can be a B. You orient it differently on the line, it can be a D. You orient it different on the line, it can be a P. You orient it different on the line, it can be a Q. You can take an N and orient it a different way, it can be a U. And several others. It's that a brain has to learn that when it comes to print, orientation matters. And so the brain actually has to learn that. And so for most people, everybody has to learn this. Everybody's brain has to learn this. For most kids, they'll learn it by the end of first grade. For most kids, they'll learn it by the end of first grade. If it goes into second and third grade and beyond, where they're having that confusion of which letter is which, that's when it becomes an indicator, but not by itself. It means they're struggling with print, but not by itself. If they're having this letter reversal challenge, it's not by itself a diagnostic determination of dyslexia. There has to be other symptoms along with it. But that's where that common confusion comes, that they see things backwards. And that's not true at all. So here's the definition. This is from the International Dyslexia Association. This is the adopted definition by them. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability, that is neurological in origin, meaning it's based in the brain. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. Most people associate dyslexia only with reading. It impacts reading greatly, but it impacts writing even more. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I just have to ask, you're not mentioning numbers at all.
So if they have issues with numbers, you mean the concept of numbers and the being able to do the mechanics and the concepts of math?
Well, okay. Like for example, written forwards, written backwards.
Mm-hmm.
So is that part of?
That's that learning orientation. That can actually honestly be an executive functioning challenge as well, because it's learning to tell themselves the correct way to form the letters or the numbers. But that in and of itself is not going to be dyslexia either. The way that dyslexia impacts math is with the reading aspects of dyslexia. Being able to read directions, be able to read word problems. That's how dyslexia is going to affect math. If they struggle with the concepts of math, the basic concepts of math, of adding, subtracting, number sense, all of those things, that's dyscalculia, which is its own disability.
Oh, they're not related?
No. Okay, any other questions? Excellent. Excellent. So that difficulty with accurate and or fluent word recognition, they'll have difficulty reading sight words. Now, sight words are used, that term sight word is used a lot of different ways in our education system. It can just be high frequency words, and our students will have a difficult time often learning those high frequency words. Or it could be words that don't follow normal phonics patterns, as they would say. They call those sight words as well. They have difficulty recognizing a word in different contexts. These are kids that they get a word figured out on one page or in one sentence, and they see that same word again on another page. It's difficult, or they can read it in a list of words, but they can't read it in the context of a sentence, or vice versa. Even though they have it figured out in one spot, they just really struggle with that accuracy and consistency. They may be able to decode words, but do it very slowly. Dyslexia is on a spectrum of mild, moderate, severe to profound. There's several symptoms to dyslexia, and each symptom can be its own mild, moderate, severe to profound. That's why two people with dyslexia aren't going to look exactly the same, because they're going to have their set of symptoms. There's some general overlying symptoms that most people with dyslexia will have, but the severity that they each have, the symptoms, will be a little bit different for each one. So that's why no two people will look exactly the same that have dyslexia, but there's generalities we can say. So there are kids that actually can read, and some of them read well enough, especially in the younger grades, to mask their dyslexia. You're going to see it more in their writing, but as they go up in grade level and the demands of the literacy and the language getting more complex is when you're going to see it more profoundly. Okay. The poor spelling, we always talk about the writing aspect because it gets so ignored, and in our culture there's so many demands for writing, especially in the workplace. We're a very literate, rich society. We rely on the written word a lot, and people forget about the writing, and not being able to spell and not being able to write efficiently can really impact their success in education, in every other aspect, especially in their adult world, in work, they're taking care of medical things, taking care of insurance things and finance things. It can really impact them greatly. So we talk about spelling a lot and why it's important to teach our students. This is from a student, she actually was one of Kelly's students. The things she wanted to do, this was her wish list, the things she wants to do when she grows up. She wants to graduate college, jump out of an airplane, visit Paris, have 100 squishies. You know those little squishy things that kids like? She wanted to have 100 squishies. That was her goal. Be an actor, go to Hollywood, go to a Taylor Swift concert, go to a wax museum, which is one of our favorite. Look how she spelled it, W-A-C-K-S, wax museum. And go in a limo. I forget what the very last one says clearly, but she wanted to ride in a limo. Ride in a limo, that's what it says. And so the thing that's really important is that if you don't understand how the written word works, it makes it very difficult to convey your ideas efficiently and effectively. This is another student. I thought I had another writing sample. Go back. Nope. Okay, let me continue with the definition. I'm going to show you a writing sample of another student, another couple students in just a little bit. So the definition continues. These difficulties typically result in a deficit in the phonological component. So a deficit meaning a lack of ability to be able to do it. In the phonological component, we've added in, at the Dyslexia Training Institute, we added in and orthographic components. That's not in the actual IDA definition. We've added that in because understanding the orthography of language is very important. Of language that is often unexpected. That unexpected part is really important in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. So what that really means is that in relation to other cognitive abilities means they actually have the ability to learn, and they're struggling with learning to read and write. So it's completely unexpected. Like, they're intellectually capable, they're thriving in other ways in learning, but they're really struggling in reading and writing, and they've been in environments where they're able to learn. So what is phonological and phonemic awareness? In the education system, they usually call it awareness, but we like to call it understanding because You can be aware of something and not understand it. We want our students to have developed understanding. So these underlying components of language are really, really important building blocks to learning to read and spell. So phonemic understanding is the ability for a student to verbally manipulate language before graphemes are presented. So this is all just auditory. Can they play with language? Can they rhyme? Can you give them a word like cat? Can they go k, at, and hear those phonemes within a word? Can they substitute out? If I take off the k, what do I have, and I add on a p, what do I have now? And can they say it's a pat? And can I change my a to an on? What do I have now? Now I have pot. Can I change my t to a d? And what do I have now? I have pod. Can they do those types of things? Can they take at, back, cat, sat? Give me another rhyme. Can they do that? Some people with dyslexia can do those skills, but it's not uncommon that they struggle with that. Phonological understanding is the ability to analyze speech and spoken language, from identifying individual words in part of a sentence to word parts or syllables, and then into the smallest part called phonemes or sound speech. So can they take a polysyllabic word like fantastic, and can they identify those spoken syllables? Fantastic. Can they take a word like spoken and go spoken? And cat, is that just cat? Is there, or do they think that's more than one syllable? Are they able to determine the different segments within a sentence, especially when a spoken sentence, like if you say things like, I want to go to the store. Well, wanna isn't really a word, right? It's want to, and do they know what that actually means? Okay. The definition, continued secondary consequences may not, it says may because it doesn't always include these things. Problems with reading comprehension. There are people with dyslexia that can decode well enough and get to comprehension, but they usually get really fatigued much faster than their peers. And reduced reading experience can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. This is probably more true when I was growing up. I'm a little bit older, because we didn't have access to all the ways to get information that our kids have now. Our kids have so many ways to get information that's not print-based. Like when I was growing up, my parents bought a set of encyclopedias, and that's how we learned a lot of things. We learned from reading books. We didn't have hundreds of channels with different kinds of information coming at us. We didn't have YouTube, and we didn't have all those platforms that have tons of videos that kids are learning through visual input in a different way than reading now, and different auditory inputs that they didn't have. There weren't podcasts. Well, I guess there were some form of podcasts. Like I grew up in Minnesota, and there was, Garrison Keillor. And people telling stories on the radio. I guess that was a form of early podcasts, right? But it wasn't like what podcasts are now, where you can learn lots of different things. You can find things on different podcasts that our kids have access to now. So they have different ways that they can build that background knowledge and build their vocabulary that weren't as accessible when people who are adults now didn't maybe have as much access to.
I wish that teachers would know about kids.
We wanted to share with you. These are words from a real student. This was one of Dr. Kelly's students. His name's Brock. He's amazing. We were at a conference one time, and somebody said it would be great to hear from actual students. We now usually often have student panels and stuff, but Kelly's like, I'm going to call Brock's mom and see if he'd be willing to record a couple little clips that we could share with these teachers and parents at this conference. And so Brock was brave enough. He has very severe dyslexia. Incredibly smart. That kid can fix anything. He can take anything apart and put it back together. He's really just a really bright kid. He's a really physical kid. He loves to be outdoors. He loves to go surfing. He's a really good kid. So this is him in his own words talking about what he would like people to know about what it's like to have dyslexia.
Like with the dyslexia, or if they do know about it, and sometimes they might want to get through the day and they just want to finish the school day, and they don't really know sometimes that a kid is struggling, and the kid wants to learn, but sometimes he doesn't have the attention to. And I'm feeling some kids are like that. I mean, I really didn't know, but that was my preference. And I wish that some teachers would like realize that some kids are trying, but that'd be their best, and they can't really give anymore. They would need like guidance, and yeah.
I love that video clip because one of the things that can happen with people with dyslexia is they have a hard time with word recall. And he was talking about how it was difficult for him. He goes, may not be like that for everybody, but that was my preference. I don't think it was his preference to struggle with reading and writing. I think what he meant is that's how it impacted him. But that was the word that he pulled. And so that's not uncommon that they can pull words that quick automatic recall of words can be difficult for many people with dyslexia. So then she asked him about wanting to learn how to spell, and this is his response.
Do you wish that teachers would have spent more time with you?
Yeah, yes, it would have helped me a lot for certain stuff, like in math. I sometimes couldn't do word problems because I couldn't read it, and I'd have to ask my mom to help me. And yeah.
Do you want to learn how to spell?
No, not really, but it would be definitely beneficial if I did. It's kind of hard, but yeah.
So I love that. I love his response. He talked about the math piece. It was the word problems and the reading, but the spelling. He's like, "Do you want to learn?" No, but he goes, "But it would be definitely beneficial." He didn't want to learn it because his last comment was because it's really hard. It was really hard for him, but he knew it would be beneficial. And so he did take a little break from tutoring for a while because he just needed a break. And he was, went from homeschooling and private schooling to public school, and he's just going to take a little break for a while. And then he called Kelly. He's like, yeah, I still need to work on this. And it was primarily the spelling part of it because he realized how much it's really affecting his life and will affect his future. So yeah, do they want to? We always say, our kids that come to our center, I'm like, we know, like, if you ask kids, do you want to have to go do this after school? Well, heck no. Who wants to? Who would want to? I can tell them I wouldn't want to either. I was at school all day. I don't want to go to tutoring after school. But they come because they want it so desperately to learn how to read and write like their peers. So let's peek a little bit at the research. Now, there's lots of research out there, as some of it you were pointing out a little bit ago. There's tons of research out there, and they've been doing research for many years on dyslexia. A lot of it is done with an fMRI. There's other types of brain scans that do happen. There's MEGs, there's SPECT scans, and there's new technology coming out all the time of different ways that they can scan the brain while they're doing activities, reading language-based activities. The most commonly used one in research right now, though, is the fMRI. And this is what that looks like. This is actually Dr. Kelly's son, Casey. He does not have dyslexia. My son happens to have dyslexia, just it was coincidence. My son's adopted, but he happens to have dyslexia, and I'm grateful I knew what I knew, so I could help him with his learning to read and write. But her son was used as a control because they always have to have control groups to be able to do the comparison of people who are struggling with reading with those who aren't. So he was used as a control, and they go into this tube, and just before they slide them in that tube, they put a cage over the top of their face. And they can't move at all. A lot of the research is done. They do some research on kids. They also do a lot of research on adults because it's really hard to do the research. They have to lay very still for a long period of time for this type of research to actually work. So it's very expensive. It's very challenging. I have parents all the time go, can they just do a brain scan to see if my child has dyslexia? And I'm like, no, because it's very hard and it's very expensive to do these types of scans. So they look for indicators instead of by doing testing with reading and writing activities. But they go into the tube, and then they can scan their brain while they're doing reading and writing activities. And what will end up, the picture on the left is an fMRI, pictures of fMRIs, and it's showing the left side of the brain. This comes from the Shaywitz, the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity, Dr. Shaywitz's. Sally Shaywitz wrote Overcoming Dyslexia, which is a fantastic book for parents and educators. It wasn't written for researchers, it was written for parents and educators. There's lots of great books out there that are written more researchy. But there's and she just updated it in March of 2020, and so there's a lot of good new information in it. But this comes from their studies, and you'll see on the left side of the brain, the typical reader is using, the far left is showing your frontal lobe right behind your forehead, and then using your parietal and your temporal lobe, so your parietal lobe's underneath the crown of your head and into your temporal lobes, and your occipital lobe, which is way in the back of your head. People with dyslexia, they're using some of those other lobes, but they're primarily relying on their frontal lobe, on that Broca's area, but they're also relying more on the right side of their brain than the left side of their brain. And so if you look at the scans on the right, those are MEG scans. You'll notice the dyslexia individual on the top, you'll notice all that activity on the right side of their brain compared to the individual with dyslexia on the bottom. They use the right side of the brain some, but not as much as the left side of the brain. Most of the activity with language is happening on the left side of the brain for people without dyslexia. People with dyslexia are using some of the left side of their brain, but primarily trying to process language on the right side of their brain. So when I describe this to kids, I'm like, they're processing language. That's why I say it's a language, it's a processing difference, not a learning disability. It's a learning difference because they're processing language, but I tell them instead of taking the superhighway, they're taking the bumpy country roads. And what we want to do is get them over to the superhighway, and with appropriate instruction, we can do that. It is a lifelong condition. 74% of poor readers in the 3rd grade remain poor readers in the 9th grade and often can't read well as adults either. And so when I told you at the beginning that Kelly and I worked in the adult literacy program, we actually queried at one point, Kelly queried all of our students that were in the adult literacy program at that time, and the average reading level was 3rd grade. That's not really functional enough for an adult in the adult literacy, in the adult world. And so the reason that often happens is in our school system, we're learning to read in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, and then they switch to, in 4th grade, to reading to learn. So we're learning to read kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade, then we switch to reading to learn. And so that direct instruction that our kids continue to need stops. And so that's why they often plateau out about that 3rd grade level. Now, they may have lots of knowledge and background knowledge. It doesn't mean that they are intellectually like a 3rd grader. They are intellectually like their age because it's not an intellectual disability, but they're struggling with printed language. So what does it look like when you go into middle and high school? They tend to have, their spelling is way behind their peers. They're starting to experience anxiety and depression. Not everybody, but it's not uncommon that they're starting to experience more anxiety and more depression because as you go up in grade level, the volume of reading and writing required is greatly increasing. And so it's really impacting them more and more. They're often told they're not trying hard enough. We see that even more and more in the middle school and high schools. And they're often told they need to be more motivated because by this point, they've been through 6 years. By the time they hit middle school, they've been through 5 to 6 years of school, 5 days a week for months on end, trying to learn to read, and they haven't. And so they might be having a little bit of a challenge with saying, yeah, this is working for me. It's not. Gifted students, those with above average IQ, they're often getting decent grades, but they're putting in so much more effort than their peers, like a lot more effort than their peers. They're spending way, way more time on their homework and their classwork than their peers are. So accommodations become incredibly imperative in middle school and high school. And we're going to talk a little bit about accommodations in just a little bit. So dyslexia is not a silent disability. It can be seen, it can be heard when they're reading, and it can be seen when they're writing. Because lots of people say dyslexia is a silent disability. It feels silent sometimes to the individual because they feel like nobody can see or hear their challenges. But if we really listen to them and listen to what they're telling us, listen to them read, look at their writing. We can see it. So here's another writing sample. This is of a third grade student. His name is Chad. You can see he's struggling with that letter confusion. Look at his B's and D's. He's got himself covered. He put them both ways. I got myself covered this way, right? He may have a little bit of dysgraphia because you can see he's struggling to form some letters still by the third grade, which is usually by this age they got their letters down pretty well. He can form them all, but he's having a little bit of trouble with spacing and staying on lines and stuff. I love his, if you look at his alphabet, it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. Notice his J. He's like, there's something funky about that. I'm not quite sure how to form that one. K, L, M, no N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, N, Z. He got his N in there, but he put it at the end because he's saying it in his head. I love that. It says, I went to the Padres game, and I'm going to tell you what I'm going to read. I'm going to read this to you and tell you what it says and why this is really important. I went to the Padres game. It was fun. The Padres lost, but they tried their very best. You can't see I apologize, you can't see the very bottom of that. Notice how he spelled Padres? He played t-ball and then softball, baseball, and his team was called the Padres. So not only did he see it on his own uniform, he saw that word on all of his teammates' uniform for years and still has no clue how to spell Padres. No clue at all. That's not uncommon. He just did not internalize it. You and I, when we're exposed to a word long enough and we see it long enough, we'll usually pick up the spelling without having to be taught how to spell it. But people with dyslexia, they don't pick up language patterns like people without dyslexia. That's one of their biggest challenges, is they don't pick up language patterns. They don't just naturally pick them up. They have to be explicitly taught language patterns. You notice he's missing any sense of punctuation because he's just trying to get his thought on paper, which is extremely challenging. Let's look at another writing sample. This is actually Brock in 9th grade, the student that you heard a little bit earlier. He went down to Mexico surfing, and Kelly said, I just want you to write, some sentences while you're down there about what you did. Don't, just put your thoughts down. And so you're going to see some interesting things even all these years with appropriate remediation. Now, mind you, his dyslexia is very, very severe. Like his is in the profound area. So it can be mild, moderate, severe to profound. So this is actually really good, believe it or not. But he said, today I went over to Fred's, which is a place you eat. Then I caught a crab. And notice how he spelled caught, C-O-U-T. And then in the next sentence he said, today I went skimboarding and caught a fish. Caught, C-O-T, as compared to C-O-U-T when he spelled it. So remember when I said they don't have consistency even within their own reading and writing. They get confused with words within their own reading and writing. I had too many Cokes today. Now notice in today, up in the first sentence, his D's going the correct way. In this sentence, he has it the way a B goes in his today. Because he has that confusion still going on into high school. I made a surfboard blanket. There was a big shore break. There was a massive stingray. I surfed a small wave. We ate crab for dinner. I grabbed a stingray. And notice his grabbed on the bottom. He put it the B the other way, and then he knew he had it that grabbed. He had that, and he's like, oh, and he wrote over it. So he had his B, so he could have his D. It wasn't. So he's doing some self-correcting. Now he has lots of spelling errors in here. Lots of things like, for example, surfboard. His surf, he has no vowel there. This is him it's so much work for him to get words onto the paper, but he could go back and start identifying some of those errors he has because he's had appropriate instruction. So when we work with our students, like, get your thought down, and the mechanics, the spelling, the grammar, the punctuation, those are things we can go work on, but get your thought down. But that's just so much work for them still. That's why accommodations are so vitally important still. So how do we help? Well, we have to have, yes?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I hope.
The sample you just showed, you said that was 9th grade, is that right?
Yeah.
When my daughter was in
Do you mean penmanship? Do you mean penmanship wise or spelling? Penmanship or?
Penmanship and formation, letter formation.
Uh-huh.
Do you find that true? Is that accurate info?
If you're talking about pure penmanship, just being able to identify the words and figure it out, yeah, as long as they can read it, that's what the education system will say.
Okay. 'Cause my daughter's
Hillary's down here going, I have something to say about Hillary's a special education lawyer.
My name is Hillary Freeman. I'm the attorney that handled the Rogish case. I will definitely talk about that this afternoon.
Yeah, I'm like, some of the stuff is coming in later parts of the day. Yeah, this is the part, doing the dyslexia part gets people riled, but trust me, there's good stuff coming the rest of the day that they're going to be answering. So what do they need? They need appropriate identification through appropriate assessment and evidence gathering, not just assessments, but all the other evidence that parents have. Collect the homework. We always tell parents, keep a homework log. Write down every day, every piece of homework they do, how long it took them, and how much help you had to give them. That evidence is so important when you go to the school, because I have yet, when a parent has done this, to go to a teacher and then show that, or go to an IEP meeting, they show that log, a teacher not go, oh my God, I had no idea that they were spending that much time or needed that much help. And so that evidence is just so important as a parent. And that isn't to just say, hey, show you. It's because it's helpful for everybody. It helps make decisions about what's appropriate for your child. It helps make identifying that they're really struggling a big piece of the key. So, keep those pieces of unedited homework. As parents always want their kids to be doing well in school, so they help them with their homework and they make sure it's all right before they go back to school. Well, the teacher gets, student A who has no learning disability, student B who does, they both have their homework correct. And they probably know, they probably took a little bit longer, but they have no idea how much extra help they had. And we as parents sometimes are masking their disability by helping them that much with their homework. And we encourage parents every once in a while, like, just don't help them with their homework for like a week or two. They're like, I'm not doing that to my kid. It's really, like, for them, it's too much. They feel really bad that they get all these red marks on their paper or told they're not doing things right. They're not going to do that because it's so hard on their self-esteem. I'm like, well, then take pictures of what they did before you help them correct it. Or make sure you keep that homework log, because those are important pieces. So they need, let's go back. They need appropriate identification. They need appropriate accommodations so that they can access grade level content and produce grade level content because they're intellectually capable of it. They need appropriate remediation, and we need to trust their intellect and trust their desire to learn. They want to learn. They desperately want to, and they're intellectually capable. So what's the difference between accommodations and remediation? Accommodations are those tools or modifications we put in place to help them access grade level content and produce grade level content. It's not giving them an advantage. It's no more an advantage. These accommodations are no more an advantage to them as somebody who's using a wheelchair or using eyeglasses or anything else. It's just what's giving them equal access. Remediation is the direct explicit instruction. And we're going to look at that as well. Accommodations do not replace remediation, meaning they have all these accommodations, we don't need to teach them, which is baloney. Yes, they do. They still need to teach. Remediation does not replace accommodations. Hopefully they don't need as many accommodations as their remediation takes place. It gets better. But some students may need accommodations all the way through their education system because of the severity of their dyslexia and if they have comorbid conditions. Dyslexia is remediated, but it doesn't go away. And students with dyslexia usually fatigue faster than their peers, and the increase in the requirements of reading and writing in grade level greatly increases as you go up, and the time to get it down decreases. And so that volume becomes overwhelming for them because they fatigue so much faster. And so they still need the accommodations. My son is currently in 11th grade. He's always been able to read at grade level, has still always had the option when needed to have his stuff in an auditory format, all his books, anything that needs to be read. Because his dysgraphia is so severe, he will always type everything, and it isn't a lack of effort or laziness on his part. Every teacher he's had every year when they first time, they're like, he really needs to work on his handwriting. I'm like, he has done handwriting without tears. He does not have fine motor skill problems. He has done real script. We have done all kinds of remediation. It's not getting any better. It's just not. And when they do fluency checks, because they'll be like, their fluency is totally fine, but they usually do a fluency check, meaning like how quickly and efficiently they can read. They usually do fluency checks on 1 to 2 minute reads. You won't see that fatigue factor with our students until they're reading 5, 10, 15 minutes. So you need to do a longer fluency check to actually see that fatigue factor. And what you usually see with our kids, if you do that 5 to 10 minute read and you're marking every error and marking every minute on your own document, what you usually see is the number of words per minute they're reading goes down. The number of errors per minute that they're making goes up. So the correct words per minute that they're reading greatly decreases as they continue to read, because the fatigue factor is hitting, and the more tired you get, the more errors you make. That's true for everybody, right? Well, it's really true for them. So we have to do their fluency check on a much longer period of time. Appropriate accommodations allow time to process information. Our students have the ability to process information if they happen to have something called double deficit dyslexia with the rapid recall or slower processing speed. Slower processing speed does not mean an intellectual disability. It just means they need more time to process the same information. And if we give them that processing time, they usually will be able to do it. But we're in a very fast-paced, especially in the classroom, a very fast-paced world. And these kids who need that extra processing time, they'll get asked a question and sometimes they just throw out any answer because they know that's what they're supposed to do. And they'll be like, that's where they get labeled, you're not paying attention, you're not trying hard enough. And it's really, they just didn't have enough processing time. They just knew they were supposed to give an answer, so they threw something out there. And so it's not, if you just gave them their processing time, they probably would have been able to come up with the correct answer. Do not require them to read out loud in front of peers or anybody else. Only have them read out loud if you're doing assessment. Reading out loud is very, very difficult for them. Do not mark off for spelling. Spelling is very challenging for students with dyslexia. Look at their content. Allow them to shine in subjects they excel in. That's really important. And we need to make sure that all the focus just isn't on their area of deficit. Make sure we're putting effort also into those areas of strength and fostering those areas of strength. Give them less homework. Not meaning no homework, meaning instead of doing this much, you do this much. It's the same content, but not as much. So they're putting in as much effort, same amount of time and effort as their peers, than making them do all of it. Don't punish them by keeping them in during like lunchtime or recess. Our kids need the break. Don't punish them by making them stay in during breaks. And toss the red pen. They see enough of it. It's not their friend. Accommodations. There's tons and tons of accommodations now. But technology has been amazing. And there's lots of things that can help. These are just a few. Books in auditory format. Bookshare has free. Bookshare and Learning Ally have special licenses for copyright that allow them to put all kinds of stuff into an auditory format. They have huge collections. Bookshare is completely free. You have to have a print-based disability, meaning a reading disability or a visual disability. Learning Ally does have a fee, but many school districts have contracts with Learning Ally that your child could have access to their curriculums free. Bookshare is all automated voices. Learning Ally they partnered with the Actors Guild, and they have lots of volunteers that necessarily aren't in the Actors Guild that read the books, so they're human voices. There's text-to-speech software. They're on any computer now. You can download free stuff, but any modern computer has text-to-speech software. There's speech-to-text software. That's where you talk and it writes down what you're saying. It takes training. It isn't as easy as just talking to the computer and it writes it down. It takes actual training. Grammar check. There's good grammar check software coming out that's much better now than it used to be. Having a note taker. My son has a note taker. He can't take notes. A lot of kids with dyslexia can't take notes. They struggle with spelling. They struggle with copying. They struggle a great deal with copying. And what are teachers usually doing when kids are supposed to be taking notes? They're talking, giving content. Writing is so difficult for our students. They're focused on the writing. They're missing all the content. So I tell teachers all the time, they're like, well, they have to learn how to take notes. I'm like, no, they don't. I'm like, they need to learn the content. What is the purpose of your class? To learn how to take notes or learn the content? If your purpose of your class is to learn the content of your subject, then let's give them access to the content of your subject. recorded lectures or meetings, organizational structures. A lot of our kids have executive functioning challenges. Executive functioning is all language based. I tell my kids it's the boss in your head that tells you what to do to get through everything in life, right? And because it's executive functioning is all language based, because you get up in the morning, you start telling yourself, what are you going to do, right? You're talking in your head to yourself all the time. They may have challenges with executive functioning. Not everybody with dyslexia does, but it's not uncommon. And so we have to put, especially for print-based stuff, we need to help them learn how to organize print-based stuff. It's not their friend. So we have to help make sure we do that. Give oral and written directions, highlighted text or notes. There's tons more. There's some amazing Microsoft. If you Google Microsoft tools, there's amazing tools from Microsoft. There is a woman, if you go to techpotential.net, her name just popped out of my head. It'll pop back in my head. She has an amazing, amazing website, and she has a great toolbox for all the different types of tools that are available for the different type of struggles that your students having. So I recommend you look at those types of things. So what is appropriate remediation? We need to teach the structure of the English language. We need to teach phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, the phoneme grapheme options. It isn't a one-to-one relationship always. A lot of our graphemes, the letters we use to write our words, have more than one phoneme option, and vice versa. A lot of our phonemes have more than one grapheme option, so they need to learn those. We need to teach the morphology. We are a morphophonemic stress time language, meaning the morphology, the bases in our roots are really important. The bases in our words are really important. Learning the bases, the prefixes and the suffixes, learning the roots. The roots are where it came from in history. Can give us information about present day spelling. They need to learn about syllables, which is an oral or written syllable in our language has one vowel pattern. A lot of times people say one vowel sound, not necessarily true. It has one vowel pattern. So you don't always hear this vowel sound. Spelling rules, they have to explicitly learn the spelling rules, and there's a lot of spelling rules. People without dyslexia pick up a lot of spelling rules without being explicitly taught them. An example I like to give all the time is if I asked you to spell the nonsense word splitch, most of you would spell it S-P-L-I-T-C-H, and then some of you would spell it S-P-L-I-C-H. Both of those would be technically correct. But why would you put a T in there? It's because a lot of you picked up this spelling pattern with probably not knowing the rule. But in English, when we have a one-syllable base that ends in a ch and has a short vowel sound directly before it, we almost always spell it TCH. We only have a few words we use just CH, like such, much, rich, and which. And one which we spell with the TCH, right? Most other words are with that TCH when we have a short vowel sound right before the ch. So how many of you knew that rule? But you apply it because you picked up the pattern. You picked up a language pattern without having to be explicitly taught. Our students need to be explicitly taught that. They need to learn the syntax, the grammar, the sentence variation, the mechanics, and the semantics. And it needs to be taught in a systematic, explicit, multi-sensory, using all the senses, visual, auditory, tactile, kinesthetic approach. If you've read anything about dyslexia, you've read about Orton Gillingham. Orton Gillingham and Slingerland are approaches that are built on the same framework. Orton Gillingham was designed for one-on-one or very small group. Slingerland was designed for classroom or small group. And then there's also structured word inquiry, which is a completely different approach. Orton Gillingham and Slingerland base it more on the alphabetic principle, on the sound-symbol relationship, and a look at through words through syllable types. Structured word inquiry is based on the fact that our English language is a morphophonemic stress time language, so they're very different approaches. Both are appropriate for preschool on up through adults. As they get older, I tend to think structured word inquiry is a better fit than Orton Gillingham as they get older, but that's my opinion. But they both Orton Gillingham and structured word inquiry are appropriate approaches for teaching a structured language that can be it's very explicit, it's very structured, it's very multisensory. With enough appropriate remediation, I'm going to come right to you just in a moment, okay? Enough appropriate remediation, and they do the brain scans, they'll start to see the dyslexic reader's brain scan to look more like the typical reader's brain scan. So here's a before and after with the other type of brain scan. You'll notice before that they're using a lot of the right side of their brain and a little bit of the left side of their brain. After, they're using more of that left side, that superhighway. Because when you are learning something, whether it's reading and writing or anything else, you are literally rewiring your brain. You're wiring your brain, not rewiring. You're wiring your brain with new neural connections. And what we want to do is make neural connections on that language processing side of the brain, the superhighway part of the brain, and that's what appropriate instruction will do. Let me go back to your question, and then I'm just going to wrap up.
On your remediation page, slide.
This one?
No, the one before that. Why isn't writing a part of that?
It is.
Where?
That all of that stuff, the structure of English, is for reading and writing.
Oh, okay. I used to see the word writing there, and I was wondering
but you don't
why.
see the word. You don't see the word reading either. It's for reading and writing. It's a good question. It's a very good question. We always remember I said it's really important. You need to teach reading and you need to teach the writing. You need to teach them together because reading helps writing, writing helps reading. Understanding spellings of words will make a huge difference in our students' life because if you understand a spelling, you can read a word and spell the word. But if you just learn to read a word, doesn't mean you learn how to spell the word. So you have to understand. If you understand spellings, it'll help a great deal. All of that is for reading and writing, both. Yes. Orton Gillingham and structured word inquiry incorporate reading and writing in every lesson. Good question, though. I know. It's very frustrating. Yeah. Yeah. So there is a challenge. I will say we provide online training, and for years teachers were paying out of their pocket. For the last probably because we started we have a dyslexia certificate program that teaches how to implement the Orton Gillingham approach. We also have a 6-week introduction to structured word inquiry class. And it's all online, and this is not a business plug. I'm just trying to give you perspective. It just happens to be a good business plug at the same time, right? So we've been doing it, but we're not the only organization that does this. There's many organizations that are out there, and all the organizations will tell you this, that they're seeing more and more schools start to pay for their teachers to do this. We've had more and more schools in the last probably 5 years that have started to pay for their teachers finally to do this type of training. We've had a few schools contract with us to come in and train their teachers on site. Well, our online course, our certificate program is actually several months, and it's all online, and you just have to do some work each week there's 5 online courses. We offer it twice a year. There's 5 online courses and then a supervised practicum, and the online coursework goes about almost 5 months. It's intensive. To really learn how to implement Orton Gillingham takes intensive training. Unfortunately, out there, the schools are looking for Band-Aids, and what they do is they put their teachers in a 1, 2, or 3-day training and say they're trained in Orton Gillingham, and that is, excuse me? It's BS. You can edit that out. But that is BS. You don't learn how to implement Orton Gillingham with fidelity in a 2 to 3 day training, or even a 5-day training. It takes more than that. There's a couple, if you guys want to know what's happening in your state, there's an organization called Decoding Dyslexia. There's a group in every state. It's primarily a parent-driven group, but there's also educators that have joined this. And their primary function or goals are to bring awareness about what dyslexia is and to advocate for change in our school systems and in our laws. And so they're helping getting a lot of laws passed in states. But what unfortunately happens a lot of time is we end up with just the Band-Aid instead of the full tourniquet that's needed, right? And so like in New Jersey was the first Decoding Dyslexia group that started. They started this amazing thing that has spread across the entire country and into Canada. And one of the first laws that they got passed is that every teacher had to be trained in dyslexia, and what they got is a 2-hour webinar was called training. But, it's a step in the right direction. And I'm from California. My business partner and I helped write one of the dyslexia laws. We've helped write with another. We're helping write another one, but one of the first ones, AB 1369, and we had all kinds of things in there. We had early identification screening. We had the definition of dyslexia, which is already in the law, but we brought it in there. We had that phonological processing deficit was a qualifying condition because they wouldn't believe it was because they didn't have a checkbox on their IEP forms because they always said it had to be a visual or auditory processing deficit. And it's like, no, a phonological processing deficit does qualify for special education services if it's impacting their ability to do grade level work. And so we got that checkbox added to their IEP. We had in their teacher training for current teachers and pre-service teachers. I'm trying to think, there was a couple other things in there. Almost everything got ripped out. We did end up with dyslexia guidelines done by the Department of Ed of California, but they're guidelines, they're not mandates. So there's a book, a book that's the dyslexia guidelines. We did end up with the checkbox of phonological processing difference and the clear definition of dyslexia in their books and stuff, but it was already there, honestly, which is kind of brought it to the forefront. All the teacher training, all the early screening was completely ripped out. So we have to go back and get more laws done, and it's a lot of fun. I'm going to just wrap up really quick so you guys have a break, because we all know you guys need a break. Can't sit here for hours. We have our upcoming conference. It's virtual. You can go on our website and see the brochure. We have a lot of stuff about, this one is more focused on social and emotional factors, along with some remediation stuff. Dr. Kelly has written these 3 amazing books. Dyslexia Advocate was her first, and that's been a really great help for lots of parents, but also a lot of teachers and educators have found it valuable because we call them administrator tales that are passed around school systems about what they truly believe. They truly believe like they aren't supposed to serve people with dyslexia. They truly believe that, but it's we call them administrator tales, kind of like, wives' tales. And so there's a lot of clarity in it. Dyslexia and spelling is to talk about how to teach people with dyslexia, why it's important to teach spelling. And then this is her most recent book, The Adult Side of Dyslexia, because it's a lifelong condition and the impacts it has. I happen to have the 3 books with me. I'll be out in the back if you want to purchase any of them. You're welcome to. These are some excellent books on a lot of the research and stuff about dyslexia.